number. And right off the top, we want to get to the topic that has occupied Raider Nation since last night and, of course, through today, and that concerns our story by our next guest, and that is Vic Tafur from The Athletic, veteran NFL and Raiders reporter who now joins us. And Vic, I hope you're doing well on this Friday. I know you haven't had much to do, right?
No, it's been pretty quiet on my end.
Well, I want to get into your story clearly because it's created some ripple effect, obviously, around Raider Nation, around the NFL, as folks have taken hold of it and read it. If you haven't read it on The Athletic, spend the money. It's about the cost of a cup of coffee at Starbucks. Go subscribe to it. But just let me recap for everybody, Vic. In your story, you talk about an incident that took place in Week 16. Nelson Agholor, of course, who had a great season for the Raiders as a free agent, first-year guy with the Raiders, came in, and apparently after the Dolphins loss, which we all know ended in the most horrific way possible, came in, and according to your sources and his teammates that you talked to, came in and said, hey, listen, the team was selfish, it didn't work hard enough, and that they had quit against the Dolphins, and I'm paraphrasing your piece here, as well as the previous two losses. And then you said, quote, he said there was no accountability in the locker room, and on winning teams, players play for one another and the coaches. So, Vic, talk about this a little bit and kind of the significance of it, because the title of your piece is about accountability, and that falls at the top with John Gruden and Mike Mayock. But in the teammate, the players and the sources you talked to that were present for this, was this something that was normal? Was this something out of the normal? Was it frustration just by a player, or was it something else?
Yeah, I don't think it's normal. I mean, I'd heard about it a little bit when it happened the week after. I didn't know all the details. I just heard that, some players have spoken out, and him especially the loudest, and he was the first one to talk, and it was kind of a silence after he talked. I didn't really think much about it, but since then I've talked to more people about it, and it kind of came out. And again, that key word you mentioned is accountability, because it was funny because when Nick Morrow mentioned it at the last day of the season, I thought it was a pretty telling quote, how he thought there was no accountability among the players and coaches. And Mike Mayock said again the other day, and then I was talking to players about, as we got more into what Nelly said, that was also a big thing what he said. And he was actually the first, if you look back at the timeline, he actually was the first guy to really bring it up and make it a big issue. So I think it is a key thing for this team, looking at what happened down the stretch. They obviously collapsed. I think that was definitely a common thread, that people thought that some guys weren't accountable, both players and coaches.
Yeah, and I think to me, in reading your piece and how you laid it out according to your sources, the reaction that's shocking to me is that veteran players didn't say anything according to your sources, and you have a guy with a Super Bowl ring. I mean, people in Raider Nation, they know about Nelson Agholor before he got to the Raiders and about the drop season, all that stuff, but this is a guy who performed well in the biggest game you can play in, which is the Super Bowl. He has a Super Bowl ring, and the fact that no one responded, and to your point, Vic, I find it so interesting that anybody who follows the team closely would be surprised by your story and what was said, because like you mentioned, there's a timeline here. You go back, Derek Carr, it might have been week 13 or somewhere around there. Derek Carr talked about commitment. He talked about a quote unquote lack of juice on the team for a playoff push. And then Alec Ingold talked about consistency and commitment. And then Mike Mayock, in two interviews with my colleague Vinny Bonsignore and with your colleague Tashawn Reed down at the Senior Bowl, he mentioned that young players needed to commit more. They needed to get in the weight room. I mean, he called out his players. And then lastly, I add in, because I was vocal about it at the time when a lot of Raider Nation felt the Raiders were being treated unfairly around the COVID protocol stuff that had happened, especially Trent Brown. And again, that's, to me, is a commitment and control and sort of accountability within the organization from the top to the players. The timeline supports it. That's why I'm not sure anyone would be surprised. Are you surprised that there are people out there who didn't see that?
No, I mean, people obviously see things different ways, so I can't, speak for all of them how they see things. But I think as far as the silence goes after Nelson talked, I mean, that to me, I can kind of see that a little bit, because after the lock, when you're in the game, in the locker room after a game, it's definitely a very raw, emotional scene. Guys are really pissed. Some guys I've talked to since the story posted, some players agreed with Nelly, some obviously didn't, but it wasn't like you really wanted that moment to jump out and say anything, because again, most of the guys are really pissed or they're sad. There's a horrible way to lose that game, and all the guys are still in shock. So I think that's why, some people remember it differently, but I think, the surprise, obviously the eeriness of the silence after he talked is definitely it's noteworthy, but I can now, looking back, see why some players didn't jump in and say something, because they also were probably still pretty raw emotionally.
Sure, and you know that. I mean, I have not been in NFL locker rooms like you have, but I've been in locker rooms where after a tough loss, yeah, guys come in and they're vocal about it. They yell, they scream, they do whatever. But then, you know, we also hear that this was from other reports that this might have happened a couple times with different players doing it, and that it was somewhat normal. And to me, you know, if you have a lot of guys come into the locker room, it doesn't matter how disappointing a loss is, but if you have multiple weeks with players coming in and talking about a lack of accountability, I don't think that's normal at all. Do you?
No, I can't imagine that's true. I mean, I saw the tweet and I was surprised by it, but I don't think this is normal. I think definitely just the tone and again, I think to me, I mean, Nelson comes out looking very good in the story. I think definitely, and talk to players I've talked to, they love Nelson. They love what he said. I mean, most of them respect him a lot. He worked very hard. He came in as the fourth receiver and really earned a bigger role and had a huge year. And also was also like a mentor to the younger guys in the team, younger receivers in our team. So he's very well respected by the coaches and by the players. So I think what he said carried some juice. And I think it was surprising because of the directness of it. I just think that some things he said, kind of like we've mentioned, have brought this whole issue of accountability kind of up to the forefront. Now it's kind of been carried on since then as a kind of theme by other players and now Mike Mayock.
Yeah, and I don't think that's why I said I was not surprised at all, because, I mean, you look at the situation and you covered it, and I know a lot of times you talk to folks and you can't talk about it publicly or even write about it because you have inside sources and you talk to players and so on. But the Trent Brown situation and the frustration that was happening there, and yes, he had injuries, yes, he had COVID, and he had that incredible thing happen to him in Cleveland. But to me, that's indicative of an issue around commitment, and you're right. I mean, you call upon that. And I learned in the business world, Vic, that look, when it comes to leadership, it doesn't matter what everyone else, quote unquote, below you does. If you're the leader, if you're the CEO, if you're the head coach, or if you're the GM, the buck stops on your desk. And so when you look at the Raiders' year, how it unfolded, and this is really what you get into the story. I think people get lost in your Agholor story at the top of the story, but when you go down, you make some really significant points here that go back to that, and that is, you know, you look at the disappointing season, and everybody points to the defense, rightfully so, but the defense itself struggled because the Raiders went out and they made a lot of free agent acquisitions, and those free agent acquisitions didn't pan out. We've seen Mike Mayock start to take some accountability for that, which I think is good and he deserves credit for. But is this something that's maybe perhaps more pervasive than we had thought originally?
Yeah, I think you look at free agents not only this year but also last year. Now the rookies this year, I think, definitely has come in and not done what they were thought they should do. And definitely the accomplishments have been kind of lacking as far as what they were brought in to do. So I think you look at what's going on in the building. Is there the right motivation? Are guys putting in the time, or is there like a solid leadership, core above these guys? And I think John's tried bringing leaders, as we mentioned in the past. Jason Witten, obviously that was why he was brought in this year. He tried, there was a few years back with Derek Johnson and Leon Hall. He's tried to bring in guys who can lead. The problem is he's bringing guys in who are kind of past their prime. I think you have to have guys who do it on the field and also to speak it. You got to be a vocal leader, but also back it up. Like I think they have some guys on the team right now who are kind of quieter, lead by example types, which is fine. But I think in this case, this year, you probably needed some more vocal guys like Nelson was. And Nelson's not a vocal guy. Nelson's usually pretty quiet. So for him, that's why it was so unusual for him to say that kind of stuff, because he doesn't say much. So I think you probably need someone a little more vocal on a regular basis, kind of to make sure guys were on the same page and definitely looking towards the same goal.
Yeah, and we've had, and by the way, Vic Tafur from The Athletic is our guest here on Silver and Black today on Raider Nation Radio. And Vic, we had Nelly on the show before, and he's such a positive guy too. So for him to get to that point, I'm sure it was a lot of frustration and seeing what's around. The fact that he's been on various teams, including a Super Bowl winner, means a lot. When you look at this, though, a lot of people, of course, you have that contingent of folks out there that immediately, when the issue of leadership comes up, and we'll talk about John Gruden and Mike Mayock in a second, but they go right to the quarterback. Like the quarterback has to be the vocal leader. That's not the case. I mean, I was watching the preview of the Al Davis versus the NFL, and you look at some of those guys back in the locker room in the 70s and the 80s when Gene Upshaw was the guy who'd get up in the locker room and kind of take control and be that vocal leader. Is that the type of guy, you don't have to focus on one position. The leadership and that veteran leadership of maybe a guy in his prime, that can come from any position, correct?
Yeah, I think you need someone who players respect, and they see the hard work he puts in, they see the example on the field, and also he's kind of the presence in the locker room and definitely talking to guys and making sure guys are motivated and definitely, you don't need a lot of motivation in the NFL, but you need some. I think you definitely need someone who can kind of yell at you from time to time and kind of make sure you're on the right path. So I think that's kind of lacking in their locker room for years, and Derek definitely is gotten better at it. I don't know if he's that's something he wants to do on a regular basis, but I don't think this goes back to Derek. I think, on social media with Raiders Twitter, you can say anything. You could be about the weather, a movie you saw. All of a sudden, it goes like a Derek Carr, like if he's a guy or not. So I'm not sure that's really the issue with this story. I think it's just more of a overall look at from the top down, from John Gruden to Mike Mayock down. Because, John Gruden could have said something after Nelson talked, and that was definitely something I thought was surprising. He didn't reply to it or say something about what he thought about what Nelson said. So I think this is more of an overall kind of there's some issues, I think, with the structure, and I think that's probably the reason why some of these guys who come here, they don't stay. They leave, and they don't really want to build things here. I think it's kind of an issue as far as having some continuity in the locker room.
Well, yeah, and that's key because to build a winner, I mean, you talk about other teams in the AFC, and you mentioned them in your story, teams like Buffalo, teams like Cleveland, that have really started to kind of get some momentum after they had to strip down and rebuild. And you look at the Raiders in the draft as well. They have some players, the jury's still out, but they have not had the impact. You've had a lot of draft capital, and so after that period of time, you would expect the team to make the jump, but they haven't. So when you look at that and you start to look at, for example, Mike Mayock, who you talk about in your piece as well, does this put a lot more pressure on him? Not only because of the year they had in going 8-8, and it was clearly a disappointment, but also when this sort of stuff comes out, when he publicly talks about how he drafted Henry Ruggs and they knew exactly what he was, yet they skipped over other receivers that might have been a little more advanced and ready to play.
Yeah, I think it definitely does. I think definitely Mike needs to have a better. I think he will say this. He needs to have a better draft this year. Needs to do better for agency. He needs some of his guys who are back from last year to make a step up, like the guys he mentioned, the guys on secondary, young guys secondary, some of the free agent guys from last year, like Corey Littleton. Those guys have to play better, and I think the hope is they will under Gus Bradley. We'll see, but definitely a fresh voice can't hurt. But he needs those guys to take a step up. He needs to add some more talent that has impact this year, because last year the guys he brought in didn't have an impact.
No, Vic Tafur from The Athletic is our guest here on Silver and Black today. And Vic, we talk about John Gruden, and in essence, he confirmed the story to me by the way he responded to you, just by saying he loved Nelson Agholor, because if it wasn't a true story, I'm sure he would have told you in some words we can't use on the radio that it wasn't. But when you look at John Gruden, I think fans look at it and say, well, geez, this guy's got a 10-year contract, and here it is 3 years in, and they've made progress, but not as much as people would like, and I'm sure as Mike Mayock said, they haven't made the progress that they need to make. What does this do as far as the pressure on John Gruden? Is he ever going to feel pressure? It's not that I'm out here saying that John Gruden needs to be on a hot seat or anything. That's not what I'm saying. But that dynamic, because of the relationship between him and Mark Davis and the length of the contract, how does that change things going into a situation like this where you clearly have some issues that are fixable, but that you need to fix them pretty quickly?
Yeah, I don't think Mark's right now concerned about John Gruden. I think he looks at, obviously there's issues, obviously, with the accountability. And this year the COVID thing was a mess. They had like the second most COVID cases in the league. I'm not sure why that happened, if that was also a lack of accountability or a lack of oversight. But that was definitely a fact. They definitely had the second most COVID cases. So I think no matter you look at the season, all the things that went wrong, but you can still look at it if you're Mark Davis. You know what? We're getting better. We were 8-8. We were better than last year. We beat the Chiefs, which was a couple of years ago had been unfathomable, beating Patrick Mahomes. If we did that, we beat the Saints. We've done some good wins. So I think you can, for Mark Davis, you know what? there were a lot of problems, but I can still see some progress. Derek Carr got better, so I think you can look at things as, you know what, we still have a chance to make the playoffs next year, and I think you have to. I think that's definitely going to be not only a goal, but it has to be kind of a make it or bust kind of deal. I think they definitely have to look at it that way. So I think Mark Davis can still have confidence in what John Gruden's doing going forward till next season.
Well, and the confidence there at the top, obviously, with the owner and the coach and in essence, the CEO of the operation on the football side of things, John Gruden. But you've talked to these players, and these players, when they talk to you in confidence, how much of this accountability issue is it a situation where it's an issue and they feel like, boy, it's got to be addressed, or is it taking on maybe a bigger sense of momentum and that they're getting really concerned about it?
No, I think the players I talked to today about the story we've called, and I think they look at it more as a locker room issue, like something they have to fix. And no one's blaming Gruden or Mayock. I think they look at it as like, you know what, that's something we have to definitely do better of. And they all of them said they love what Nelson said. I think they definitely, they think he was a great teammate, and they want more of that. They want more of that passion from other guys. I think that's something they'll look at. And the problem is there's some of the younger guys. You mentioned the draft picks the last few years. Like guys like Max Crosby, I think will be a leader at some point. He's definitely made strides in the area. I think he'll have a bigger role. I think Elizabeth Cleveland could be that guy. So you have younger guys who definitely can step into bigger shoes as we go forward.
Yeah, and that to me has been an issue, Vic, all season long, and I've called it out, not because they're not good kids or they're not good players, but maturity issues, even with what Mike Mayock said about Henry Ruggs, and Henry Ruggs kind of taking it and use it in social media, the quote and all that stuff, which, I get. Listen, you and I are a little longer in the tooth than these young guys who live and die by social media, but I think those are the types of things where when they go out in free agency and they go get the talent that they need, they really need to be selective and get to what you said early on in this interview, which is you got to get guys who are vocal, who demand that accountability in the locker room amongst the players, because the players do have to. You talked to guys like Phil Villapiano and those guys from the golden era of the Raiders back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and they all say, look, we didn't need a coach to tell us what to do. We took care of each other. If there was a problem in the locker room, we took care of it. The coaches didn't need to do it. Is that going to put even more pressure on them to find the right free agent, not just a guy who can play ball, but a guy who's going to lead in that locker room too?
I think so. I think definitely that'll be a key focus from this offseason. And also, I was going to say, they use, I've given them a hard time to the Raiders for using the COVID stuff as an excuse, but I will say it is valid in the sense that you had guys in and out of the locker room since beginning of training camp. There wasn't really a sense of continuity on the roster as far as having the same guys there every single week, every single day. So, like John Abram was in and out of the locker room all season long. Trent Brown, you mentioned. The guys you're counting on weren't always there. So I think I can definitely see where there were issues this year where you probably wouldn't have had those in a normal season.
Yeah, Vic, no, just great work, though, man. We appreciate you taking time. It sounds to me like, these are issues, and I know some Raider fans who get very defensive about their team aren't happy about the piece because of the issues there, but the only way you improve on issues and you correct them so that you can move past them and continue to grow is to address them, and I think your story hopefully will help shed some light on that. So, Vic, thanks again for spending some time for us today. We appreciate it.
All right, take care.
All right, there you go. Vic Tafur, right from the man who wrote the story that kind of created all the buzz today around the Nelson Agholor incident in Week 16. But we want to hear what you guys have to say. 702-365-9200 is the number. And again, I think, look, things like this, these are not, I've seen some people tweeting out negative things at Vic, calling him a liar. Even Vinny Bonsignor, who we're going to have later on the show from the RJ, who has a little bit of a different twist on things, calling him a liar because he confirmed the story as well. Look, it's not about lying. This is actually something that when it comes to light, yeah, it should be taken care of in the locker room, but it's not. But it's correctable. It's not like it's a fatal issue.